Sai was seen walking towards a hunter slightly older than him, who had a greatsword on his back. "You wanted to see me, field team leader?" Sai asked his superior. "And this would be?" Ren asked. "The field team leader. He's the commander's grandson and the guy who oversaw the activities of the hunters. Although, now he's basically the commander of Celiana." Razara explained. "Wow. That's moving up in the world," Ilias said. The other hunter quickly turned and greeted him. "Yes, Sai. Thank you so much for coming. You see, we've recently had to send out a request to the guild for a 6th fleet, since many of our hunters have suddenly retired. I could understand a few of them at a time, but it seems like dozens of our hunters have just completely given up and moved on. I can't understand why," the field team leader informed him. Maybe the constant threat of being eaten by monsters had something to do with it. I mean, people think they know what they're in for. They never really do. Sai pointed out, shuddering at whatever thought creeped into his head. Okay, even though I'd love to fight all the monsters, Sai has a point here. Yang admitted. Yep. Fighting Grimm is fun and all, but it definitely wears you down after a while, especially if you do it for decades. And these monsters are probably the same, more than likely worse, since they're so much stronger than the Grimm. Crow agreed. And clearly, it also affects their sanity, based on what we've seen from Fatalis. Glinda added. Are you still going to therapy for Fatalis? The lead hunter asked. Oh, my therapist gave up. Anyway, what does the 6th fleet have to do with me? Sai questioned. Many students laughed at this while some adults were appalled. What kind of therapist would give up treating their patient's trauma? Winter demanded. Any therapist that has heard how bad Fatalis messed him up. Cinder told her. Yeah, I don't think anyone is that good. John agreed. Well, apparently, these hunters are pretty new to the career. Like, right out of training. Almost none of them have even been on a proper hunt before. The field team leader explained. Hearing this makes some of the cast, especially Young and Coco, wince. Yikes. Gotta feel bad for the newbies here. Coco said sympathetically. What? Did you forget Ashvin launched you all off a cliff before you even officially joined this school? Emerald questioned. Yeah, but we graduated from schools like Signal and Sanctum before that, where we had encounters with Grimm before Beacon. Nora pointed out. Everyone has to start somewhere. Ironwood said. The sound of crickets was heard as Sai was clearly deadpanning at the news. So, I guess we'll need a 7th fleet to replace them in a week or two. The demon questioned again. First of all, that's horrible. And second of all, no. I want you to train them when they get here. Make sure they can pick up and use any of the 14 kinds of weapons like pros. Do you think you can do that? The superior hunter asked him. All the less mature members of the audience laughed at this, while the more mature members frowned. How could he say something like that? Summer asked, appalled by what she heard. That was a horrible joke. Kira agreed in disgust. Yeah, but he's not wrong. Crow told them. Why would you joke about your colleagues dying? That's like something Carden would do. Delvet insisted. It definitely lacks tact, but he's technically correct. If you put soldiers that just finished basic training out on the field, they're going to be the ones to die first. Weiss said. She then noticed everyone looking at her. What? She asked. It may be technically correct, but it's still wrong. You agree with him, Weiss. Penny said disapprovingly. Sai suddenly seemed a bit nervous at this, stepping away a bit, before turning back to his boss. Right. All 14 weapons, I can. I'll manage that. He tried to say confidently, but was clearly the opposite. This was something the field team leader caught on to quickly. "You can't use all 14 weapons, can you?" he questioned. "No. Absolutely not. 7 at most," Sai finally admitted. Ruby's eyes immediately gained stars in them. 14 weapons? That's amazing. I bet they're all super cool. I wonder if any of them are mecha shift weapons? She asked excitedly. I would say that's a bit much, but that Flint guy from Atlas uses a trumpet, so I guess we don't have any room to talk, Neo said. Based on how awkwardly he said that, he definitely can't use all 14 weapons, though, Blake said. Then, many of them laughed when they got confirmation of this. Called it, the Faunus princess said with a smirk. Still, being able to use 7 different weapons is pretty impressive. Summer praised. Yeah, you got that right. And I should know, since my weapon has like 5 different forms. Crow agreed. Yes, it takes an incredible amount of skill and discipline to use so many different weapons, Winter said. But just how different are these weapons? That makes all the difference, Ironwood wondered. But then, does that mean we're only seeing the 7 weapons Sai can use? Ruby asked, a bit disappointed. Oh, no. Don't worry, we'll see them all. It just means that Sai's gonna make a fool of himself with those 7 weapons, Katana said. Yay! More weapons. Ruby cheered. Just try not to get as excited as you did watching Iron Man, Ruby. C.I. Ender whispered, Ruby blushing at the memory of her first big O during the first movie. Sai was then seen facing off against a Deviljo. Since time immemorial, hunters have faced off against monsters in order to ensure the safety of the innocent, so they can have some semblance of safe and happy lives in this crazy, dangerous world. But of course, we would never be able to do that without the proper weapons to face such deadly beast. Sai began as he continued fighting, before he and his handler were seen in a volcano before a Rajang, which fired its lightning beam between them, slowly moving towards his handler. Unless you're physics-defyingly strong like the Admiral and can lift and throw boulders at the monster. He added awkwardly as, indeed, the Admiral ran in from nowhere, picking up a massive boulder and slamming it into the ground to shield himself and Sai's handler from the lightning beam. Yang whistled at this. Dang, I knew he had muscles, but I didn't realize the Admiral was jacked enough to tear up the ground and lift huge boulders like that. Respect, Yang said, significantly impressed. I wouldn't mind testing my strength against him in an arm wrestling match. Hazel agreed. And this Rajang was now Sai's opponent. But for those of us that can't lift roughly 5-ton boulders, we have actual weapons. And in the time since the beginning, we have made no less than 14 different weapons to cover every possible method of fighting such unique and different creature, as well as ensuring that anyone who wishes to be a hunter has an option to fight with which they feel safe. For instance, not every hunter is willing to get as close as the dual blades or sword and shield require, or some may be squeamish about blood and prefer a blunt weapon that will only cause internal bleeding in the monster. And today, you shall see what all these weapons are capable of. They all have their uses, no one weapon being better or worse than the others, only down to personal preference. The host explained as he managed to break one of the Rajang's horns. Well, variety is certainly important. And Port would certainly agree about personal preference, Ashbin said. But I wonder, what happens if your weapon is a bad match against a certain monster? I doubt it's easy to hit a speedy monster like Mizutsun or Tobi Kadachi with a big, heavy weapon like Alia seems to prefer. Adam wondered. That's what hunting parties are for. If the heavy hitters can't hit a monster, the speedsters go in and slow them down so the heavy hitter can land their hits. Or having to deal with 4 different hunters at once is sure to slow them down. Kira said. That's really smart, Kira. Even I didn't think of that. John praised, causing his girlfriend to blush. Our host was then seen back in Astera. But before we get into the proper weapons, it's important to note the staple sidearm of almost every New World hunter, arguably just as important as our main weapon, the slinger. He explained as the focus was drawn to the miniature crossbow mounted on his left arm. Perhaps pretty simple in appearance, the slinger is incredibly versatile and a true lifesaver in dire situations. Very similar to a crossbow or slingshot, hence the name, it can fire a myriad of small, round objects that can be used to stun monsters or set up traps. Sai informed as he was shown in the ancient forest, shooting a cluster of large rocks held in the air by vines, which came crashing down on a giant garuga. It also houses a grappling hook, strong enough to support the weight of 2 full-sized humans, perfect for latching onto the surprisingly strong wedge beetles found all throughout the New World, allowing a hunter to escape danger at a moment's notice. He added as he grappled to a beetle, narrowly avoiding an attack from a Gerardus. RWBY gasped in awe at this. Arm-mounted crossbows. That's so cool. Cinder, you should totally get those. RWBY said. Maybe. But then what would be the point of my bow? Cinder questioned. Still, it's ingenious they developed it to be able to use all manner of small spherical objects found throughout the land. I'm also a fan of using it to set up environmental traps. Glinda said. And as someone who keeps a grappling hook cane, I can confirm they are incredibly useful and incredibly awesome. Roman said. I know, right? That would be awesome. RWBY said. RWBY. Why would you need a grappling hook? Your semblance basically lets you fly. Blake pointed out. RWBY's excitement died and she just glared at the Faunus girl. Dream killer. She muttered. He was then seen climbing a wall of vines in the Coral Highlands. And, as a fun little bonus, if you can find an area with enough of them, you can swing around like a certain arachnid-themed superhero. He pointed out, before he was seen grappling from one beetle to another in a big circle at different elevations. Spider Dude does whatever does Spider Do spins a web to catch flies big enough to trap bad guys, he's saying as he continued to mess around while grappling all over the place. And, if you really want a more serious note, they're perfect for shooting their small projectiles to kill Vespoids and Horntor while not dealing enough damage to destroy their fragile bodies. He added as he was indeed shown shooting down Vespoid in the Wildspire Waste, but not destroying their bodies. Many were laughing at this. Huh. Great Spider-Man reference. Nora giggled. And that's why I want a grappling hook, Blake. Because it's fun. RWBY insisted. You can still fly. Blake said, rolling her eyes. Oh, man. Imagine if you could get those beetles to follow you, so could grapple anywhere. Velvet said in awe, not noticing Katana's daughters giggling to each other. And then Sai somehow used the slinger to grapple onto a Brachidio's face in the Elder's Recess. And after a recent upgrade, they now come equipped with a clutch claw, a large, claw on the end of the grappling device, allowing us to latch onto a monster and reel ourselves in, allowing us to deal some serious point-blank damage to weaken certain parts of a monster, or to smack a monster with the claw so hard, it turns the monster roughly 60 degrees. This can then be paired with the slinger's firing mechanism to shoot all of its ammo at once with full force, sending the monster stumbling forward. And if done properly in the right spot, you can even send the monster directly into a wall, crashing into it and falling to the ground in a daze. The host explained as he indeed sent the crushing wyvern crashing into a wall. Many were impressed by the power the claw had behind it, Coco letting out a whistle. Whoa. That thing must really pack a punch to send monsters reeling or flying forward like that," she said with a nod of approval. "Indeed. Quite impressive for an arm-mounted device. But I'm also impressed with hunters being able to use it to knock monsters into a wall. Very nice strategy and tactics at play here." Winter agreed. "Not to mention, it's a great way to close the distance. You could probably use something like that, John," Ren told his leader. "Says the one who did have grappling hooks installed in his weapons." John grumbled. "If anything, I think that proves my point. They're useful, so I use them," Ren countered. Sai was then seen in the wild spire again, fighting a Diablos. So that is the slinger, an incredibly useful and versatile weapon, but at the end of the day, it's only a sidearm. You'd be hard-pressed to bring down a monster with just the slinger. Thankfully, we hunters have access to no less than 14 main weapons we can use. But it's important to remember we often hunt in teams of 4. And the majority of these weapons are melee weapons, so even with 60-odd foot of monster to attack, there will be times when you are in close proximity to your allies, so it's important to watch where you're swinging, unless you have an unfortunate accident. The demonic as he knocked the beast to the ground. Suddenly, Sai was shown swinging a huge sword in an upward diagonal arc, which sent an unfortunate hunter standing in front of him off the cliff behind him with a rather goofy scream. Now feels like a good time to mention he hunts dodogamas. The Sapphire Star excused his actions as he sheathed his sword and quickly fled the scene. Many members of the cast deadpanned at this. Did he really just try to downplay the fact he sent a comrade flying off a cliff? Weiss asked, unimpressed. Yeah. You don't even joke about people hunting dodo. Neo said. He's probably just saying that so everyone ignores the fact he almost killed his friend. If he doesn't have any proof, I don't believe it. Ilya agreed. Still, he has a point. One must always be careful so as not to harm their teammates on an assignment. Something I recall very nearly happening during initiation. Ashbin said, looking to Ruby and Weiss, who blushed and looked away nervously. Once again, Sai was making his way through the wild spire. So without further ado, it's time to get into the main weapons that have let hunters fight on the level of elder dragons. He declared as he ventured off into the wasteland. Greatsword. Sai continued to face off against the Brachydios, even with the interruption from an Azure Rat Halos. Now, one of the first things we as hunters must accept is that we are simply weaker than almost any monster we are going to encounter. They are bigger, more durable, often stronger, and in a majority of cases, faster than us. The gap in power is simply too great for us to be on a level playing field against most monsters, especially against the Elder Dragons, who even heavy artillery seems to only tickle more than anything. Sai pointed out grimly as the hunter desperately evaded Anjanatha's furious attacks. Well, that's not very inspiring. Velvet said, getting a little bit discouraged about facing monsters. He's telling the truth. Sugarcoating the situation makes it sound like it doesn't need to be taken seriously. And even with the grim, if you aren't serious and focused, it could be the death of you. Summer told the rabbit girl. Akushala Deora was then shown laying down in the elder's recess and looking out into the distance. Look what they need to mimic a fraction of our power. A man spoke harshly as if the beast itself was looking down on an orange-haired female hunter firing a ballista at a Glavenus, only really succeeding in making the brute wyvern mad. Geez, the dragon's pretty full of himself, ain't he? Roman said, not liking the supposed smugness of the metal monster. Well, it is coated in almost indestructible metal armor, so it's almost impossible to hurt it. You're pretty cocky even after a bunch of schoolgirls kick your ass, so I'd say he's justified in that confidence. Emerald said, earning a growl from the former crime lord. Sai was then shown in the elder's recess. But there is one main weapon that almost allows us to stand on equal footing with these mighty beasts. Capable of doing the most damage of any weapon in one attack, capable of cleaving smaller monsters in half or knocking down larger monsters with one well-placed shot, the greatsword. The host declared as he pulled out his weapon, a massive, frozen swordfish. Much like with Cotton's weapons, the Atlesians were in disbelief when they saw the comical claymore. Just when I thought we were done with the ridiculous weapons. Ironwood groaned. I have to agree, sir. Frozen or not, surely that swordfish isn't durable enough to be struck against monsters with scales harder than steel. Not to mention, it likely lacks any decent sharp edges to cut a monster like a sword can. Penny agreed, Winter nodding along with the gynoid. Is there no one out there who makes sure these weapons are practical and effective before the hunters use them? Weiss questioned. If they are, they must be insane to give these weapons the green light. Cinder said. The host was then seen fighting a Lunastra with this giant frozen fish. As the largest and heaviest weapon available to hunters, the sheer weight behind the weapon causes immense damage upon contact, with the size allowing for greater range to stay at a safer distance. And strikes can be charged for greater damage. Unfortunately, that weight also limits your speed and agility, making you less maneuverable than other weapons. The blade is sturdy enough to block attacks, but this is far less reliable than the actual shields used with other weapons. Still, in terms of dealing heavy damage in only a few strikes, few other weapons can compete. And in a way, using this weapon is almost like playing chess with the monsters, reading the situation, anticipating your opponent's move, staying out of the danger zone and putting yourself in the right position to strike when it is your time. As powerful as the weapon is, it isn't just about the power, but about being smart as well. He explained as he managed to knock down the Empress of Flames. I'll admit, goofy weapon aside, this one feels like a perfect fit for me. Hazel said, admiring the weapon. Heck yeah. I bet I could use this weapon, no problem. And I'd be chopping Grim and monsters in half. Yang agreed eagerly. I mean, I did basically give my sword a greatsword mode, so I could get behind this. John agreed. No, you gave your sword a two-handed form. That made it slightly bigger and stronger, but a two-handed sword is not instantly a greatsword. Only a massive blade that takes all your effort to swing is worthy of being called a greatsword. Rosara said, steadfastly defending her weapon of choice. Still, I quite like his chest metaphor, it does seem quite fitting. Ashvin said. Probably because you've been playing a planetary chess game with your ex for centuries. Crow told him. The fight with the Lunastra was shown once more, the monster having taken significant damage. And so, that's the greatsword, lots of power at the cost of speed, but the level of damage it causes is well worth it, many hunters using this weapon for a quick and easy victory. But, power isn't everything. A good hunter also has skill. And the next weapon is all about skill. Sai declared, before finally defeating the Lunastra and walking off. Longsword. Sai was now struggling against an ebony Odogaron in the Coral Highlands, having to stay on the defensive by blocking or dodging. As previously stated, power can only do so much for you. But all the power in the world is worth nothing if you can't land the attacks you throw. He explained as he was then seen in the Elder's Recess again with a different weapon on his back. Strength must be tempered by skill and precision. And no weapon embodies these traits better than the longsword. He declared as he then produced a massive, but slender katana. Winter nodded at Sai's explanation. Wise words. All the strength in the world is useless without skill and discipline to use it properly. She agreed. Then, many were impressed when they saw the glowing orange blade. Wow! That katana is epic. Blake, I always thought you should use one. Ruby said. I've never used one before. And I don't plan to start with one twice my size, Blake told her. The host was fighting the Odogaron once again, but he was doing significantly better this time. Just as long as the greatsword, but much more slender and therefore lighter, the longsword allows for much faster attacks in a far wider range of motion. Almost too wide of motion, since longsword has been condemned with the label of most irritating weapon to have a partner using, many hunters complaining about being tripped up by a careless longsword user. However, this does nothing to dampen a longsword user's spirits. Like, seriously, something about the longsword awakens the true fighting spirit inside a hunter, allowing them to unleash incredibly ferocious attacks after a certain time, culminating into the devastating spirit Helmbreaker. Sai declared, unleashing several swift and skillful strikes on the Odogaron, before he suddenly leapt high into the air, before coming down with a mighty downward slice from the sword. Wow. You would think something that long would be a bit unwieldy, but he's doing really well with it, Roman said. Well, you could argue the same with the greatsword, Ilya pointed out. True, but with the greatsword, the weapon's own weight was doing most of the work. With a longsword like that, you have to control the momentum, then reverse it and swing the blade back the other way. Pyrrha corrected. The spirit part sounds really interesting, though. I didn't think a specific weapon could change your spirit, Neo said, surprised. Yeah. And that Helmbreaker attack must be devastating. The speed of the hunter coming down and putting all that force behind the blade. I'm amazed it doesn't cleave a monster in half, Penny said. Sai was now fighting a Tigrex with a longsword. And while it is far too light to be used to block, it allows for quite a bit more maneuverability than the longsword, so you can quickly sidestep out of the danger zone. And, of course, there's no need to block when you can masterfully counter with a lightning-fast Iato strike. The host explained, now stood in the classic Iato stance as a Tigrex came rushing at him. Ryujin no Ken Wakuri. He shouted out as, at the very last minute, he drew the blade and delivered a slash that easily knocked down the pseudo-wyvern. Impressive. It's almost like my moonslice, Adam said, admiring the attack. And it's clever. Rather than exhaust himself with delivering a powerful strike, he's using the monster's speed and momentum to give the attack its force when the monster basically throws its enormous body into a strong, thin, sharp blade. Glinda noted. But I can't help but feel like he was referencing something when he said stuff in that different language, Yang said suspiciously. The host then felt the need to pose with his weapon. So, that's the longsword. It is speed and precision, with a level of skill and combos that will never leave its wielder without an option. Just be prepared for the groans, eye rolls, and sighs you'll get from other hunters when you try to join their quests, he advised, before starting to walk away. Now, between these two weapons, you may be concerned that all weapons are insanely oversized for your average person. But worry not, because the next weapons are smaller, but stands as physical proof that size doesn't matter, he declared as he suddenly vanished by leaping high into the air. That was awesome. He was sidestepping attacks like nothing and slicing it up super fast, Nora said, mimicking the motions of Sai's attacks. I'm kind of wondering what that spirit sensation feels like, Emerald added. And I gotta say, I like the flow he has when he makes all these moves. Pretty elegant. So, all in all, 10 out of 10. Coco said. Indeed. It almost reminds me of a samurai's katana. That was a weapon my father thought I should consider using, Ren admitted. Sword and shield. Sai was now fighting a Brachydios again with a long sword. So, you've seen a weapon that is powerful, but slow, and another that is quick and precise, but lacks in defense and cannot be charged for stronger attacks. And they're both insanely long. And you may be wondering, is there a balance between the two factors, as well as being shorter. And as luck would have it, there is a weapon that is perfectly balanced, as all things should be. And this weapon is none other than the sword and shield. The host explained, brandishing a sword and shield. Oh, yeah. Back to the classics. John said, happy to see his weapon of choice. Classic. Or as most people call it, boring. Yang called out. Yang, you should respect everyone's choice of weapon, young lady. And the classics are amazing. My best friends at Beacon were a pair of twins who used swords and shields. They even let me give them a try, and I found them very reliable weapons. Summer scolded. The host was now fighting the crushing wyvern with the new weapon. A straightforward, yet reliable weapon used since medieval times, the sword and shield are the most balanced of all weapons. They are technically a jack-of-all-trades type weapon, being able to attack quickly, block attacks and focus power into them for more powerful attacks. The blunt shield can be used to bludgeon the monster and leave them stunned and helpless to further attacks. It can be used to launch its wielder into the air and land some decent aerial attacks, and elemental swords will pretty quickly stack up their elemental damage on the target, which makes up for the relatively weak damage the weapon itself will deal. Also, most other weapons are either too large or take up both hands while being used, preventing hunters from using items while holding their weapons, but with the shield being strapped to the hunter's arm, their second hand is freed up, letting them freely use weapons, making them incredible for support. Sai explained as he demonstrated the weapon's capabilities. Well, when he puts it like that, I can admit that it sounds like an excellent choice of weapon. Ironwood said. Coverage in as many areas is essential for a well-rounded fighting style. Ashbin agreed. Yeah. And we all remember from Captain America that a shield makes a pretty good weapon, too. Crow added with a smirk. With all the damage Sai put the Brachydios through, the brute wyvern could take no more and made a full retreat. Unfortunately, while the sword and shield is a jack-of-all-trades weapon, it is sadly the master of none as well, as its lower damage and less options in certain roles compared to other weapons. It may be able to extend beyond a niche method of combat, but it struggles to compete with the weapons that do fill these niches. Still, it is a solid weapon that allows for excellent team support by using items while being able to attack, and with this, it allows its wielder to put down traps in an instant, allowing them to exploit chances for free damage by immediately attacking their target right after. But, that is the sword and shield. A weapon with range in every aspect of combat, but that range is limited in every area. But like the old saying, two heads are better than one, what happens when you use two swords? Sai questioned as he chased after the Brachydios. He has a point. Having coverage in every area is important, but most people like a weapon that really excels in one particular area. You should try to be as well-rounded as you can, but everyone has certain areas they're stronger in than others. Summer admitted. But, since most hunters, and certainly our students and huntsmen or huntresses usually fight in groups, I suppose it is fine to focus on a singular area as long as your allies can cover other areas to make up for the ones you may be lacking in. Glinda said. Still, it's nice to see a weapon that can perform in all areas. And, like he said, it's useful to have someone who can lay dual blades. Sai was seen in combat with several different monsters using several different weapons. The longsword, sword and shield, the insect glaive, and the switch axe. All these weapons are decently fast and allow for a good range of motion, but none of them truly embody speed and agility quite as much as the dual blades. He declared as he suddenly brandished a pair of 3 mugs of ale tied together. Many face-bombed when they saw the particular dual blade Sai chose to show off. Did he seriously tie a bunch of mugs together and call it a weapon? Ironwood groaned. That's something I'd expect from you, Crow. Winter said with a look to the former drunk, who simply shrugged in response. Hey, you'd be surprised. Those mugs can do a lot of damage. Neo said, remembering a few bar fights her and Roman had been a part of in Mistral, where they used those types of mugs. Neo knocked out several patrons with those mugs, which survived being smashed against several skulls. And they're even filled with something. I can only pray he doesn't actually drink from them while on a hunt. Weiss said, massaging her forehead. I believe, much like with the monsters, we should stop questioning the logic of these weapons for the sake of our sanity. Penny said. Despite how ridiculous the weapon was, a Nergigant was shown letting out a scream of fear with text reading "Run, fam," before the beast fled from the silver-haired swordsman. Whoa. Sai must really be good with the dual blades if Nergigant is scared of him when he's using them. Velvet said in surprise. That has to be a joke. He probably fought it first and now it's injured. It's not just running because it's scared. Coco tried to convince her girlfriend and herself. The Sapphire Star was now fighting the spiky Elder Dragon, attacking swiftly while dodging Nergigant's attacks. Two small and light blades wielded together, the dual blades are unparalleled for their lightning-fast striking efficiency. While they can't deal nearly as much damage as bigger weapons in single strikes, they obviously aren't used with single strikes, instead used to unleash a devastating flurry of rapid strikes in a matter of seconds. And they are unmatched in the amount of elemental damage they inflict on a monster with their rapid strikes. Their light nature also allows the user to be much lighter on their feet in exchange for being unable to block and defend. Evade the monster's attacks and go in for your own when you have the opening. In a way, it's almost like a dance of death, using your moves to outpace and defeat your opponent, with the slightest misstep spelling your doom. He explained as he ran up a crystal spire and launched off with a spinning attack, dodging Nergigant's attacks once again. And that's why I like them. Quick, efficient and devastating. Cinder said with a nod. His technique is a bit wild and lacks a real form, but I suppose it works. That makes it harder to predict. Winter noted. I like the dance of death metaphor. Maybe you should take up dual blades, Uncle Crow. Ruby suggested, knowing her uncle's fighting style involves a number of moves that almost look like ballet. I'll consider it. Crow said. Sai managed to knock the Eater of Elders down and continued to attack. But, in a similar manner to the longsword, dual-blade users have a unique ferocity, almost as if the spirit of a demon takes over them. This demon mode affords even greater speed and agility, letting the hunters easily evade monster attacks and strike back with even more insane flurries of blows, but at the cost of quickly wearing the user out. Thankfully, this can be countered with dash juice or eating a wiggly lychee, greatly increasing a hunter's endurance and allowing them to fight far longer without tiring out. Sai explained, raising his blades with a flash and attacking Nergigant with doubled ferocity. And this mode allows hunters to unleash the dual blade's ultimate technique, when leaping off a ledge, become a human saw blade and tear your way down a monster's back, dealing massive damage. The bigger the monster, the more damage. And a longer ride. It's like a violent roller coaster. He explained as he spun down a giant red dragon's back with a buzzsaw sound effect. Many of them were intrigued when they saw Sai's movements change with this new demon mode he had entered. Huh. So, in other words, it's like Yang when you piss her off? Emerald asked with a smirk. You want to be on the list of things that piss me off, Em? Yang questioned. Then, they were all amazed at the buzzsaw technique. Whoa. That's so cool. All the teens gushed. I bet that's so much fun. He even compared it to a roller coaster. Nora said. Sai was posing once again with his dual blades crossed in front of him. So that is the dual blades, the unrivaled champions of speed and agility, as well as the definition of death by 1,000 cuts. Plus, arguably, the weapons with the most variety of shapes. He explained, showing off several different dual blades, cleavers, axes, gauntlets, claws, and even nunchaku. But, of course, with all these razor-sharp weapons, there is often a lot of blood flying around, which I understand not everyone is a fan of. Thankfully, there are a couple of blunt weapons that may not bring the blood, but they do bring the pain. He declared as whistled for a wing drake and flew off once again. I can agree with that. I'm happy to avoid seeing blood as much as possible. Pyrrha said, shuddering a little bit as she turned slightly green. A shade of green shared by Velvet. Same here. Definitely not a fan of blood. The rabbit girl agreed, gagging a bit. Hammer. The Sapphire Star was using his dual blades again to fend off a Barroth. Bladed weapons have many advantages. Obviously, they can slice through a monster, either severing an extra appendage such as a tail, or simply leaving deep cutis in the monster to bleed from, slowly but surely weakening the target over time. However, some monsters have insanely thick shells even the strongest of blades cannot pierce. He explained as his weapons kept bouncing off the landslide wyvern. Once again, he was now facing the camera with a different weapon on his back. In times like these, a different type of damage is needed to do damage through the tough shell. Blunt damage. And no weapon does this better than the mighty hammer. He declared, brandishing the bludgeoning weapon, a giant, cooked turkey leg. Once again, many were dumbfounded by the host's choice to show off this particular hammer, with the Atlesians groaning. Make it stop. Please. Weiss groaned. Nora even looked upset at this. Why would he use such a large drumstick for a weapon? He could be eating it instead. She cried out. Not to mention, cooked meat is softer than raw meat because the connective tissues and fibers have been gelatinized. So he would have been better off using a raw drumstick. Cinder pointed out. Many looked to the half-maiden at this. How do you know that? Blake asked. Child labor slave, remember? I cleaned and cooked. Cinder reminded them. Sai was now hitting the Barroth with the oversized drumstick. Quite a powerful weapon, second only to the greatsword, but slightly faster. The hammer specializes in breaking through the tougher shell blades struggle to cut through and, although it obviously can't sever pieces off a monster like bladed weapon, they are capable of breaking off certain parts of other monsters' bladed weapons cannot get through, such as the head crest of a Barroth. Although this is another weapon that cannot be used to block, it allows a good bit of maneuverability, allowing you to still get out of danger quickly. And, of course, they are the best weapon for stunning a monster with massive head trauma. He explained as he managed to break off Varitha's head crest, knocking the beast down. And in addition, much like the greatsword, power can be charged into the hammer for greater attacks, plus this weapon offers great aerial control when leaping from a ledge. He added, leaping from a ledge, completely changing direction midair, then doing it again upon swinging the weapon. Oh, yeah. Fear the power of the bonk. Nora declared, lightly tapping on Ren's head with the balloon hammer John tempers Crochet Moores with. No, please. Have mercy, Ren said sarcastically. Still, it's quite impressive just how much can be done with the hammer. I would have never expected it to offer such a level of aerial control. Ashbin said, impressed. And it's cool it breaks parts sharp weapons can't. John said. Neo, remind me we'll need sharp and blunt weapons to gather monster parts to sell. Roman whispered to her, the former mute rolling her eyes. The host was fighting the Barroth with the oversized drumstick again. So that's the hammer, a beast of blunt force trauma with a solid mix of speed and power and a lot more skill than many give it credit for. But there is one more heavy hitter that delivers not only impressive concussive damage, but also some musical mayhem. The host declared as the Baroth was defeated and the hunter flew off with a wingdrake. Everyone looked at each other in confusion at this. Music? They all asked at once. Hunting horn. Sai was now dancing in the middle of Astra. Music. One of the most ancient and treasured arts humanity has to offer. Not only is it simply enjoyable, but humans have been using music to power through adversity since time immemorial, like listening to an inspirational song to amp yourself and power through an intense workout, or a hard rock beat to make an arduous task even a bit more bearable. And hunters have taken this to the extreme to combine devastating blunt force trauma with empowering music to create the ultimate weapon of mass percussion. The hunting horn. The host declared, drawing a giant guitar made out of a dragon's scales and horns. Dang. Sai's got moves. John said, impressed by the dance moves the host was showing off. Very impressive. Too bad we couldn't get him to teach Pyrrha some moves before the dance. Ren said, giving a small glare to Mistral's champion, causing Pyrrha to shrink in her seat a bit. Oh, I'm sure he would have taught her plenty of things. Tekko said with a smirk, knowing the relationship between Sai and Pyrrha in a different timeline. He's not wrong, though. Some good tunes can get you through the roughest of things. Yang said, thinking of all the times she would listen to chores to make them fly by. But then, the group was in awe of the guitar-like weapon Sai pulled out. That's so cool. Yang, Crow, Coco, and Roman said as they all marveled at the weapon. That's a sick-looking guitar. Ilya praised. And it looks like it's made out of scales and horns. He made that thing out of a dragon. Hazel said, impressed. The Sapphire Star was now swinging this guitar to make music, before fighting a Tigrex with it. Most often labeled as little more than a support weapon, the hunting horn is a heavy blunt weapon that can do high damage at the cost of speed and being unable to block. But whether it be simply a placebo from hearing energizing music, or the dormant power in the materials of the monsters used to create the weapon, the hunting horn is capable of unleashing melodies that literally empowers those that hear it, bestowing enhanced abilities as if receiving a buff in a video game, with different horns playing different songs. Sai declared, appearing to briefly flash at certain moments while swinging the hunting horn. Empowering yourself and your teammates with music. Interesting. Adam said, intrigued. That sounds epic. I've always wished I could get buffs like in a video game. Nora said in amazement. He uses some interesting movements with the weapon, too. Blake noted. He's fighting a monster with music. That is so awesome. Imagine using music against the Grim. That would be amazing. Ruby cheered. The host once again held the weapon up, unleashing loud music, before swinging it. By swinging the horn in a certain way, the weapon unleashes musical notes that can be matched in different ways to play songs, to bestow enhancements onto the wielder and their teammates, from increasing physical attributes, to being able to negate the cripplingly low roars of monsters, to even increasing elemental resistances. Plus, it's just cool to see how a deadly monster can be turned into an instrument. Sai declared as he fought against the brutal pseudo-wyvern. Sai was now posing with his weapon to show it off in all its glory. This is a guitar, made out of Vitali's materials. I turned the god of all monsters into a guitar. A god-tar, if you will. He said jokingly, before swinging the weapon to make music. Everyone, minus the Atlas crew, was in awe at the statement the host just made. He turned a god monster into a guitar. Ruby gushed. I know, right? That is so epic. Emerald cried out. I want that guitar so bad now. Yang said longingly. The host was now playing the hunting horn again while stood beside the captured Tigrex. So, that is the hunting horn, a powerful blunt force weapon that can be used to benefit the entire hunting party, empowering the hunters while the wielder delivers some extreme damage to the target, all while jamming out to some epic music. Sai explained, now back in Astera, posing with his deadly music-making weapon. So, one thing you may have noticed with this first handful of weapons is that while these weapons yield great offensive power, their defensive power is rather lacking, some being completely unable to block any oncoming damage. That's where the next weapon comes in, allowing you to become the immovable object to any monster's unstoppable force. He declared, before leaping into the sky once again. Well, I think we can all agree that is an awesome weapon. Coco said. Yeah. And it would be amazing for a lot of huntsmen and huntresses that hunt in groups. Velvet agreed. Right? Being able to buff people with music. That's just awesome. And it looks like it does some heavy damage, too. Neo agreed. Now the only thing that could make it better would be if it could debuff the enemies. Ilya said. Well, that's the first half, but there's still quite a few where those came from. Katana said, switching to the next video. Lance. Sai was now fighting a Rajang with a greatsword, clearly struggling to defend against the monster's hits with the giant blade. While offense is important to weaken and defeat the monsters that are causing problems throughout the land, defense is equally important so you can return home to your family and not end up as a hunter-happy meal. The host spoke, before suddenly showing a hunter being snatched up in an Anjanatha's jaws. Which is why the shield is the biggest part of this weapon, the greatest defensive option a hunter can have, the lance. He declared as he was now shown holding a large shield along with the aforementioned polearm. The teens, as well as Crow and Summer, as much as the Rose matriarch tried to resist, all laughed at Sai's joke. A hunter-happy meal. That's so ridiculous, but also so hilarious. The eldest Rose laughed. Now I'm just imagining a monsters carrying around a Macrolan's Happy Meal bag, but instead of a burger, it's a hunter yelling and kicking inside it. Nora giggled. Ruby gasped at this. I was just thinking that, too. I wonder what they'd get for a toy. Would it be the weapon? Ruby wondered. Then, she gaped when she saw the weapon. Ooh, a lance. I always thought Weiss should use one of those. She said excitedly. Why would I use such a massive weapon that's only good for stabbing when my weapon is already so much more swift and versatile? Weiss questioned, causing Ruby to pout. The fight against the Rajang continued, and while Sai was still being pushed back by the Rajang strikes, he was handling them far better than he did with the greatsword. As previously stated, the lance is accompanied by the largest shield of any weapon the hunters have in their arsenals. Meanwhile, the lance part of the weapon offers great range and reach, is incredibly straightforward, you just poke the monster. Over and over. You can poke normal height, you can poke high, charge with the weapon and repeatedly poke the monsters, and you can block and counter poke, which is pretty strong, yeah. That's pretty much it. It's pretty much about the shield, really. But that shield can protect you from almost anything. Sai informed as he continued to fight the fanged beast. And the idea of just poking a monster got more laughs from the teens. Monsters beware. We can poke you. Ilya declared. Oh, no. Anything but being poked. Blake said jokingly, much like Ren did for Nora with the hammer. Honestly, how much harm could a simple little poke do to a monster the size of a bus? Weiss questioned. Do you recall the time you sat on one of Nora's jacks when her and Ruby were playing in the common area? That's a rather small poke, yet you made quite the fuss over it. Ren reminded her, getting a huge laugh from RWBY and JNP while Weiss glared at the ninja boy with a huge blush on her face. Now I'm picturing that old Don and Larry cartoon, where the mouse would poke the cat with something as tiny as a needle. but it would still make him scream and jump up to the ceiling. John said with a chuckle, getting more laughs from the group. Sai was facing off against a Fatales, the mighty beast lowering itself and breathing a massive cone of fire, but Sai merely held his shield in front of him, completely unfazed by the flames. Who? Thanks for heating it up, Fatales. I should have brought some marshmallows. The host taunted from behind his shield. And they got even more laughs from Sai, casually defending against the devastation of Fatales' flames. Wow, that's gotta be a hit to Fatales' ego. Being the god of all monsters, with a fire that can burn the world and a hunter wants to use it for marshmallows. Yang laughed, holding her stomach and kicking in elation. Stop using my fire for marshmallows. It's supposed to melt you into a puddle. Neo complained in a deep and gruff voice, clearly meant to be what she believed Fatales' voice to be like. Still, for the weapon to be able to hold off Fatales' flames, clearly Sai wasn't exaggerating about its defensive prowess. Glinda said, impressed. I wonder how it might hold up against Salem's stronger magics. Ashbin wondered, considering taking up a collapsible shield like John's. Once again, the host was posing with the weapon. So, that is the lance, a relatively straightforward weapon that may be a bit lacking in the offensive department, but no weapon has a better chance of letting you walk away from the hunt unharmed. However, we aren't quite done with the lance yet, as there is a variation of the weapon that many people find quite explosive. Sai set up the next weapon, before flying off with his wingdrake again. Gun lance. Sai was fighting a Banbaro with his lance, his attacks not getting much reaction from the beast. So, the lance is an incredible defensive tool, but the trade-off for that weapon is offense. It's gonna take quite a while in order to bring down a 60+ foot monster by poking it. Thankfully, we worked on the design a bit and came up with an upgraded version of the weapon, the gun lance. He declared as he pulled out another lance, although the shield was a good bit smaller and the lance in question looked a bit more like a giant rifle with a small sword for a bayonet. Then when getting to the gun lance, RWBY especially goes haha for it while Crow is also impressed, pointing out that it's like something from their world, Remnant. RWBY's eyes immediately began to sparkle as she saw the weapon. Whoa! It looks awesome. It's as big as the lance, but now it has a blade to slice with. And it can shoot stuff. That's even better, she said, clapping excitedly. It certainly looks impressive. Almost like something we'd have on Remnant. Crow said. The fight with the Banbaro continued, Sai's attacks appearing to be more effective now. While still having the same thrusting power as its cousin, the gun lance is also capable of slashing the enemy, and even doing some slam attacks. But, the main new point of the gun lance is, of course, the gun. This weapon is able to store and fire special explosive shells, up to 5 at a time. They still have to be used at melee range, but they can do some great damage to the monster. And a recent modification allowed hunters to combine the ammo in their slinger to a large spike that can be fired from the weapon to create the worm stake, a powerful stake that is launched and stabbed into the monster, which will then unleash small explosions when hit with more shells, causing extra damage to monsters that bypasses their armor. And there is a chamber filled with highly explosive material that, after some time to charge up, can unleash a devastating explosion known as Wyvern's Fire for massive damage, but must recharge afterward. Sai explained as he blasted the beast. Nice. With a boost in offense, that brings this weapon up to be more well-rounded. Very nice, Hazel said with a nod. And the blade gives it a more diverse move pool than just poking, which is always nice. Adam added. Plus it can shoot, so that's pretty useful. I'd just take a couple shots from long range to get them mad, then brace myself and hold it ready as the monster charged in so they'd impale themselves on the bayonet. Emerald said. However, that plan was quickly ruined when they heard of the range of the shells. Oh. Never mind. That's lame. Why would anyone want a gun that has to be used at melee range? What's even the point? Emerald questioned. Then, many of them were shocked when they saw the blast created by Wyvern's fire. Whoa. Now that's some serious firepower. Coco praised. I'm amazed the Banbaro is still standing. That probably would have obliterated any Grim up to the size of an Ursa Major. Cinder said, impressed. As always, the host was now posing with his weapon. And that is all you need to know about the Gunlance. An upgraded version to put the offense back into a very defensive weapon with extra explosive power that allows you to even bypass a monster's armor for extra damage. But I often find myself rubbing shoulders with people that carry enough weapons to arm a small battalion. He explained as a man with white hair and a red coat, a very tall woman in a catsuit and a ninja in a tight-fitting black sleeveless jumpsuit were shown. And I myself am known for bringing a small arsenal into battle. And while most hunters sadly cannot do the same, they've compensated by making weapons that take the form of multiple different weapons, like the next entry on our list. He declared, running and leaping off a cliff and sailing away with his glider mantle. Yes. Multi-weapons. Velvet cheered, beating a shocked RWBY to the punch. This should be very intriguing. Winter said. If I may ask, who are those people Sykes showed there? Pyrrha asked. The one in red is his best friend and business partner, Dante Sparta. The woman is one of his mentors, Bayonetta. And the sexy ninja is Ryu Hayabusa, my fiancé. Katana said, holding up her right hand, wiggling her ring finger, sporting an engagement ring, which the crew realized they only just noticed now. And how are they able to carry as many weapons as Sai claims? Penny asked. Well, Dante's an uber-powerful demon like us, even if he's only a half-demon. Bayonetta is a magical Umbra witch who can headbutt a meteor, and Ryu is part of the dragon lineage, descended from an ancient dragon, so he's way more powerful than a normal human. So yeah, they're strong enough to carry dozens of weapons easy. Katana explained. Lucky. RWBY grumbled. You guys have some insane friends. Coco said, a bit shocked at Katana casually talking about these people far beyond the level of even the most powerful huntsmen or huntresses in Remnant. Switch axe. Sai was then shown fighting several different monsters with the hammer, dual blades, and lance. Power. Speed. Range. Many weapons sadly have to trade one or more of these to excel in one of the other areas. And it is rather taxing for a person to carry around multiple different weapons and adjust accordingly based on the situation. He explained the three people from the last entry briefly being shown, with text reading unless you're these guys below them. Thankfully, one of the few things the ancient civilization was develop mecha-shift weaponry capable of transforming into different weapons. The first of which is the switch axe. He declared, pulling out a mighty axe. Mecha-shift weaponry? Impressive. Your culture seemed a lot more primitive than Remnant, yet you are capable of making things on the lower end of what we're capable of. I wonder what else this ancient civilization was capable of? Ironwood wondered. Making a giant tower with almost an entire species of dragon and creating an abomination of science. Katana said, reminding everyone briefly of the equal dragon weapon, causing many of them to shudder at the terrible weapon. Yeah, maybe they were wiped out for a reason. And they think that led to them being wiped out should be forgotten with them. Roman said. Ooh, an axe. That was my choice of weapon right after hammer. Nora said. Maybe you should make a double-sided one, like Thor's Stormbreaker. John suggested. Nora gasped at this. John, you're a genius. She cried out, giving him a crushing hug. The host was now fighting a Diablos with the weapon. As previously stated, the switch axe is a weapon capable of switching between two weapons, hence the name. These two weapons are an axe, as you may have guessed, and a sword, neither of which can be used to block. The axe is utilized for more powerful attacks with greater reach, as well as better mobility, while the sword mode is faster and can utilize the files built into the weapon, where the weapon's elemental properties are filtered into the file and can be released out into the blade for explosive finishers. And with repeated attacks on the monster, the file can be amped to deliver a devastating elemental discharge, creating a greatly damaging explosion and, as you may have guessed again, do massive amounts of elemental damage. Sai explained as he stabbed the monster and blasted himself back with the aforementioned attack. One mode for power, another for speed. That makes sense, Yang said. But why is sword mode the only one that does a lot of elemental damage? Blake questioned. Well, it's easier to project the element and the files outward into the straighter blade of the sword. Teko managed to come up with a BS answer, since none of the demons knew why for sure. Still, that's a pretty epic looking attack. That would really put the hurt on some grim. And if you used an ice switch axe, even if it didn't kill them, it'd probably freeze them. Summer said excitedly, just as much a weapon nut as her daughter. As always, he posed with the weapon again. And that is the switch axe, a versatile weapon that can change to fit the situation and can deal devastating elemental damage in punishing explosive bursts. Now, you may remember the sword and shield. But have you ever stopped to consider the possibility of what would happen if you combined your sword and shield? Well, the next weapon answers that very question, Sai declared, before leaping into the air once again. You get a bigger sword. That's what happens when I combine my sword and shield, John said. That's one version, kid. But if Cotton's weapons are anything to go by, these weapons are nothing like what you'd expect, Crow pointed out. Charge blade. Sai was fighting in Odogaron with the sword and shield again. As said before, the sword and shield is a very capable weapon that has advantages in many areas. But, what if you combine these two long-standing partners into an axe for every greater range and power? The result you would get from this is the charge blade, the host declared, jumping forward in slow motion and slashing with a rather small sword, with glowing circles around his non-sword forearm. Wait a minute. I thought he said there was a shield with this weapon. And what are those rings around his arm? Weiss questioned. Katana seemed rather confused at this, too. Hang on, she said, leaning in and looking closer at the weapon, before sighing. Oh, my gods, Sai. Not again. She groaned. What is it? RWBY asked. That's the Force Edge, one of Dante's weapons. Which means Sai stole it. So Dante's probably going to kick his ass, Katana said, rolling her eyes. Honestly, it's completely deplorable to steal anyone's weapon, especially from one of your friends. Not to mention stupid. Winter scoffed. Is that a jab at us? Neo questioned, gesturing to herself, Roman and Emerald. Winter simply looked away, deciding not to answer. And his shield is rings of demon energy, she added. Well, that's pretty epic, but I don't see how any of us are supposed to do something like that, Ilya said in annoyance. The Sapphire Star was now fighting a pink Rathian with this weapon. Okay, now this is one tricky weapon, so keep that in mind. So, the main mode of the weapon is sword and shield form. Attacking with the sword charges files within the weapon, hence the name. However, after a certain point, your files will overload and your sword will bounce off. At this point, you should charge the files into your shield to power it up and improve your defensive capabilities, at which point you can charge more files. Once these fill up again, you combine the sword and shield into the axe form of the weapon, offering you greater power, which drains your files. And in this state, though it drains much of your files, you can unleash a devastating and explosive elemental discharge with the super amped element discharge. Sai explained as he suddenly transformed his sword into a much larger one and attacking, like he had described. The group then jumped as how the hell did he change his sword like that? I know he's a demon and probably knows magic, but what the heck? Roman said. Are you kidding me, Sai? Katana snapped, then groaned. That's another of Dante's weapons, a laster, a lightning-powered claymore. She explained. Ooh, mama-like. Nora said. It's cool, but again, how are average people supposed to magically turn one sword into a completely different weapon? Emerald questioned. I'm more concerned with the fact that these files eventually cause your weapon to bounce off. If a prime feature of the weapon eventually limits its attack capabilities, it's a flawed design. Adam pointed out. You have a point, Mr. Taurus, but that's without properly applying the files. If done correctly, it's quite intriguing. Ashvin corrected. Indeed. Being able to power up the shield is one thing, but combining the weapon shield and weapon into a whole different type of weapon is quite intriguing. It would have been enough to simply make the sword slightly bigger, as with Mr. Ark's weapon, but turning it into an axe is something not even some of our best and brightest have considered. It's certainly an excellent choice to improve the weapon's range and power. Glinda said. Not to mention that amped discharge attack. A full power blast of the right element should bring just about anything to its knees. Hazel added with a nod of approval. And then, of course, he had to pose with the weapon. So, that is the charge blade. A very technical weapon that is difficult to master, but once you are able to do so, it becomes one of the most advanced damage-dealing machines in a hunter's arsenal. Now, as we all know, many monsters are capable of flying, which keeps them out of range of a hunter's attacks. But what if I were to tell you that there was a weapon that gave hunters aerial capabilities and evened the playing field? He questioned, before flying off with the wingdrake again. No way. There's a weapon that actually lets you fly. That's awesome. Yang said. Well, not exactly flying, but close to it. Rizara corrected. Yeah, Pyrrha, have you ever tried using your shield to fly with your semblance? John asked. Interesting idea, John, but that would consume a lot of aura very quickly. Pyrrha told him. Insect glaive. The host was now struggling to reach an airborne rat halos with his dual blades. It's a simple fact, humans can't fly. So this puts us human hunters at a disadvantage against the monsters that can fly. Thankfully, one thing humans can do is find a way to overcome our disadvantages. And so we harnessed our ingenuity in order to create a weapon that allowed us to take to the skies ourselves to knock down the monsters that evaded our reach, the insect glaive. He declared as he readied a staff-like weapon. Hey, a staff. Sun might like this weapon. Ilias said. Staffs are great weapons and all, a good balance of speed and strength while being decent for crowd control, but I don't see how it gives them much of an advantage against airborne enemies. Penny said uncertainly. I'm guessing they can use its long reach to get at the enemies. Pyrrha theorized. The Sapphire Star was now fighting the monster again while both were on the ground. This weapon is rather simple, yet quite effective. A staff that perfectly balances speed and power, although still lacks the ability to block attacks, it makes up for it with incredible mobility, allowing you to easily jump or roll out of the way of an attack. And then, using the staff to pole vault up into the air, either to kick off the air and spiral through the air to put themselves into a more favorable position, or score some aerial attacks on flying monsters, or hit hard to reach spots, such as a monster's back, wings and tail. And after landing a successful attack, the force of said attack will launch the hunter back into the air to land another strike. The aerial attacks aren't as strong as the land-based ones, but they still pack a doozy. And by repeatedly attack, spiraling through the air and launching themselves higher, hunters can easily evade attacks, stay in the air, to avoid any hazards down below. He explained, launching into the air and was managing to outmaneuver the rat halos. Many were shocked at the way Sai used this weapon to take to the air and reach the rat halos. Well, of all the ways I expected this weapon to be used, that was not one of them. Winter said in surprise. That looks like so much fun. Ruby said in awe. Yeah, right? He may not be flying, but it looks like the closest thing to it. Yang said, amazed. Indeed. Being able to maneuver through the air with such ease is already impressive, but to pull off the moves he is while keeping enough lift to stay in the air is absolutely masterful. Cinder added, quite impressed with the movements she saw. Even a lot of my moves only keep me in the air because I spin and generate momentum and lift to keep me in the air. Blake admitted. Sai was facing off against Ashera Ishvaldo once again, bouncing off the beast with the insect glaive and masterfully maneuvering in the air. Oh, yeah. Screw your sand, Shara Ishvalda. Can't get me up here. Not from the top ropes, baby. He taunted the elder dragon as he repeatedly flew over it and struck it while avoiding its sand traps below. Many chuckled at Sai taunting the elder dragon he holds such contempt for. While I can't agree with taunting a creature that can bring down mountains, that is quite an ingenious way to avoid its sand traps. It would likely also work well against Almudron and other monsters that use mud to fight. Ren theorized. I'm almost jealous. Even I'm not that good at moving in the air and I can freaking fly. Crow said. Yeah. My style's pretty acrobatic, so I bet I could do a lot with a weapon like that. Neo said excitedly. But that excitement quickly faded when she thought about something. But wait. Why is it called the insect glaive? She asked. The host was now standing back in Astera. Now, you may be wondering where the insect portion of the insect glaive comes from. Well, you might be happy to know that this weapon comes built-in with a partner. He said, the view zooming in on his right arm, where a giant insect was resting. Yep. That is a bug as big as my forearm. Now, that may be off-putting, but trust me, this kinsect can and will be your best friend. He explained as the creature was shown at different angles. Weiss and Emerald were immediately creeped out by the kinsect on his forearm. You. Why would he want any bug touching him, let alone one that huge? Weiss cried out in disgust. I know, right? How does he know it's not gonna bite his face off or suck his blood or something? Emerald said, grossed out. Well, he doesn't seem to be worried about the bug trying anything, so he must be comfortable around it. I doubt he'd be so calm if it was dangerous. Coco pointed out. Yeah. He even called it his best friend. So it must be pretty reliable. John added. Sai was now hunting a rat halos again, the kinsect flying and attacking the beast. By firing a specialized ball of pheromones into a monster, it signals the kinsect to attack the monster and will attack repeatedly unless called back. And after it takes a bite out of the monster, it extracts some fluid from a monster, which upon returning to its hunter, will release as a cloud of pheromones that upon inhalation, empowers the hunter. Red pheromones increases power, white increases speed, orange increases defense, and green restores some health. These kinsects can also be nurtured to grow into more powerful versions of themselves, with the final versions being powerful enough to take down low-ranking monsters on their own. He boasted proudly as the kinsect continued to fight with him. Wow. I never thought a bug would be that helpful. Ilias said. Just helping to fight would be enough, but buffing you to make you stronger and healing you. This thing has just become my favorite insect ever. Nora added. Indeed. We'll have to gather up as many of them as we can back on Remnant. Ironwood plotted. It's also quite fascinating to hear they can change depending on how they are nurtured. I wonder what other kinds of kinsect there are. Glinda wondered. I thought he was going to show some different examples, but I guess he forgot in the end. But long story short, some are great at doing blunt damage, some are better at cutting and severing parts of the monster, some have status abilities, and, if you have the right items, they can be infused with elemental properties. Katana explained. Everyone's jaw dropped at this. I think this might be the most OP bug ever. John said. The kinsect on Sai's arm was shown again. It's a bruiser and your new best buddy all in one. A loud and angry man declared as Sai was back out in the field, having the insect attack a rat halos again. Pyrrha smiled at this. I have to agree. This is an insect I'd be happy to have at my side. Pyrrha said, before getting a strange look from Arachne. You're an arachnid. That's not an insect. Pyrrha told her monster partner. Yeah. They're kind of cute when you look past them being giant bugs. And the fact they are willing to help you fight giant monsters while making you stronger is incredible. Velvet said, amazed. I'll admit, it's impressive, but I'd still rather have any and all insects 10 feet or further away from me at all times. Weiss said stubbornly. Sai was now posing with the weapon again. So that is the insect glaive, a weapon of unparalleled aerial ability that comes with a partner that can both fight with you and empower you to lessen the ordeal. But with all these impressive melee weapons, there's the unavoidable fact that some of us simply aren't built for close-range combat. Maybe you're intimidated to get close to giant, spiky, scaly monsters that could fold most humans like tissue paper. There's nothing wrong with that. Especially since we have weapons that can easily hit a monster at long range. Like, you think melee weapons would have died out after that? He explained before whistling for a wingdrake to take him elsewhere. A point I can most certainly understand. It's simply facts. The closer you are to a monster or grim, the greater chance you have of being injured. Ironwood said. True, but it takes far more bullets to bring down most grim than simple sword swings. Cinder told the general. Besides, how else will one test their strength and learn their limits? Then fighting up close and personal? Hazel questioned. Light bow gun. The host was now running for his life in an attempt to flee from an enraged Teostra. Let's face it, it's dangerous to hunt monster. They're bigger than us, stronger than us, and faster than us. It does not take much effort on their part to kill us. Pretty much one bite is enough to make one less person on the planet. So getting very close to one is generally a poor decision for your health. Armor helps, but it doesn't change the fact that you're gonna get hurt. 9 out of 10 hunters believe that the most dangerous place to be near a monster is near a monster. And that 10th hunter was eaten. Sai explained, now standing in the ancient forest. So, it may be a better idea to stay at a safe distance while to fight a monster. And to do that, you'll need a projectile weapon, like the bow guns. And if you want to be quick on your feet while you shoot, your best option is the light bow gun. He declared, drawing a crossbow-like weapon made of Deviljo materials. Wait, so is it a crossbow? Velvet asked. It can't be. It has a barrel like a rifle. Coco pointed out. But for a light weapon, it's a lot bigger than I expected. Penny said. Not all light weapons are small, Penny. There are a decent number of large, yet light firearms. Light machine guns being the perfect example, able to be carried by personnel, despite their standard versions usually being mounted weapons. Winter corrected. Sai was now using the light bow gun to shoot at a Kuluyaku. As the name implies, the light bow gun is a weapon that looks like a crossbow, shoots more like a gun and is very light, allowing for more maneuverability at the cost of, you guessed it, not being able to block. But that's what the gun is for in the first place, you shouldn't be close enough to need to block. The bow guns fire small shells made from many different nuts and berries found throughout the New World at high speeds and over long distances, allowing you to hit the monster from safer distances. And the light bow gun in particular excels at rapid fire to quickly lay down damage on the target. The host explained as he kept out of the monster's reach while firing at it. Getting to the light blowgun, RWBY likes that it's a crossbow that fires more like a machine gun, and with different ammo. It's a crossbow that shoots like a machine gun. That is so cool. RWBY said. I find it interesting that the ammo comes from berries and other plants. That means that you can likely pick up lots of things to use for ammo while you're hunting your target. Pira said. I also like that it's light and lets you keep on the move easily. That's certainly important if you lack defense like this weapon does. Pira said. Yeah, but it must be annoying to remember to grab all the stuff to make more ammo while you're chasing after monsters or Grim. Plus having to make it on the fly is probably really difficult. But if you ignore it, you'll wind up screwing yourself over. Ilya brought up a counterpoint. With all the other weapons so far, you could still fight without ammo. But if you don't have anything to shoot, your gun is useless. Hazel agreed with the color changer. The sapphire star was now on a ledge, shooting down at the Kulu. And different shots have different advantages, such as piercing ammo penetrating the monster's armor, spread ammo to burst open and hit the monster in several places like a shotgun, slicing ammo to weaken and sever a monster's parts, sticky ammo to attach to a monster and explode, status and elemental ammo for what you might have guessed, trank ammo to capture a monster, and even demon and armor ammo to boost the attack and defense of your teammates. For once, it's actually beneficial to shoot your friend in the face. Keep in mind, different ammo has different ranges and, as an extra bonus, the light bow gun also comes equipped with powerful mines known as Wyvern Blast, which can be laid down with 3 at a time and exploded either by a hunter shooting it or a monster accidentally hitting it, with more powerful attacks, creating a bigger explosion and more damage. Don't ask me how that works. He explained, putting down the mines and evading a Deviljo's attack. Wow. That's like all the different shots I have for Crescent Rose. RWBY said excitedly. It is important to have a varied selection of ammo. Weiss said with a nod. Those mines would also be pretty useful. I wonder if I can install something like that into Janduya. Coco pondered. I'm with Sai on one thing, though, I have no clue how a harder hit changes the power of an explosion. Roman said. Sai continued to shoot at the Kulu, but was clearly retreating and not just evading the monster. But unfortunately, while it does lay down damage quickly, it does not do very much damage, as many of the more powerful ammo options are restricted to the big brother of this weapon, the heavy bow gun. Still, if you want to be quick on your feet while keeping your distance from the monsters, this weapon is probably your best option. Your next option would be trading that speed and mobility for a lot more power. He declared, before cutting a nearby plant, which created a cloud of smoke for our host to disappear into. What? That's lame. Why would you make a weapon that can't shoot all the ammo types? Young asked. Well, Young, would Ember Seliphet be able to shoot Nora's grenades like Magheld can? Blake questioned. Well, no, but they weren't made for that. Young said. Exactly. Just like the light bow gun wasn't meant for the bigger ammo types. But as long as the ammo it can use is effective enough, that's all that matters. Blake told her. Heavy bow gun. The Sapphire Star was now using his Savage Deviljo light bow gun against, ironically, a Deviljo. So, the light bow gun is great for doing small amounts of damage very quickly, but the simple fact is, it is pretty lacking when it comes to immediate stopping power. And a lot of options for stronger ammo simply are not compatible with this smaller weapon. If you want the big bullets and the big power to lay the big hurt on a monster at a distance, your only option is the heavy bow gun. Sai declared as he pulled out a much larger and heavier looking golden bow gun. Whoa! Now that thing looks like it can pack a punch. Mama like Nora purred. Ooh! And it's gold. Sai's got some good tastes. Neo said. Maybe, but gold is heavy and soft, so it's a brittle weapon that weighs him down. Ren pointed out. Well, it is the heavy bow gun. Kind of meant to be that way. John said. Sai was now firing upon the World Eater with this larger weapon, demanding it drop the Dota Gamma it had in its jaws. So, as previously stated, the heavy bow gun fires higher caliber ammo the light bow gun can't handle, as well as getting access to newer varieties, such as Cluster, which fires out a large bomb that splits into smaller ones before detonating for multiple explosions and more damage. And whereas the light bow gun has one type of special ammo in the form of Wyvern Blast, the heavy bow gun has two special ammo types, Wyvern Heart and Wyvern Snipe. Don't get too excited, you only get one or the other, not both. Still, they're both pretty good, with Wyvern Heart being a devastating onslaught of automatic fire, while Wyvern Snipe is a powerful piercing shot that will soon explode for heavy damage. Keep in mind with Wyvern Snipe, you have to lay down on the ground to deal with the recoil, which leaves you vulnerable. Also, the weapon can be modified with a shield, so you can guard against attacks. The host explained as he continued to unload on the monster. Hurry, Sai! Save the dodo! All the girls cried out. After noticing the looks the boys were giving them, Glinda quickly straightened up. Ahem. Yes, well. That cluster ammo seems quite effective. However, splitting apart and making more explosions like that could cause a problem for a hunting party of melee users with a hunter using a heavy bow gun and cluster ammo with them. You would have to be very careful using this while hunting with companions, she said. Still, it would definitely put a hurt on the monsters. Just tell your friends to back off for a minute while you're shooting the cluster ammo, Crow said. Then, they saw Sai using the Wyvern Snipe. Oh, yeah. Sniping for the win, baby. Ruby cheered. You're joking, right? It didn't even look like that tickled the DeViljo. He would have been better off with Wyvern Heart. All-out automatic fire is where it's at, Coco said, to which Ruby pouted in annoyance. As always, the host was now posing with his weapon. So that is the heavy bow gun, trading speed and mobility for power and a wider array of ammo with more damaging options if you don't mind being weighted down a bit. But one issue that steers many away from the bow guns is how technical all the ammo types can be, not to mention, you have to go out and make some types of ammo not sold by merchants. Some people want a simpler, yet equally effective option. Luckily, we have just that, he declared, before whistling and flying off with a wingdrake again. Bow. Sai was shooting at a Baroth with a light bow gun, but repeatedly ran out of the ammo type he was currently using. The bow guns are certainly versatile and effective at a long range. However, that versatility comes from their ammo types, but not all ammo types are sold in stores, requiring the taxing process of a hunter farming for materials to make the ammo, only to have it eventually run out. Thankfully, there is a much simpler option when you take away the gun and are left with the bow, he declared, pulling out a bow and arrow. Cinder smirked at seeing the other half of her weapons of choice. This ought to be good, she said eagerly. But what can a bow do that a gun can't? Ironwood questioned. Plenty, Cinder insisted. To be fair, James, A wound from an arrowhead is significantly more dangerous than a bullet wound, since arrows are larger and cut through more as they pierce through a target. And depending on the type of arrowhead, they can be much more difficult to extract than a bullet. Ashbin told the general. The host was now firing arrows at a Brachidios. An elegant weapon from a more civilized age, the bow and arrow matches simplicity with effectiveness. You just shoot some big, sharp sticks into a monster. However, many hunters take this a step further and often fire up to 3 arrows at once for heavier damage. In addition, the hunters have started packing specialized arrows that come equipped with a balloon and a basket, which can be fired into the air, activating the balloon and opening the basket to rain dozens of spiky metal balls down onto the monster for heavy damage and solid knockout potential. And to provide a bit of extra oomph, arrow tips can be dipped in a special coating, which can all be bought in stores, to give them special effects. All bows can utilize close-range coating and power coating, which up the arrow's power at close range and the general power. There are also status coatings in the form of blast, poison, paralysis, and sleep, but some of these are only compatible with certain bows. Sai explained as he continued firing on the brute wyvern. I have to admit, I always thought bows were cooler than guns. Blake admitted. Yeah, but I don't know about firing 3 arrows at once. I'm pretty sure that takes away from the overall power behind the arrows, plus makes it harder to aim. Emerald said, having learned a bit about the bow from her time with Cinder. I like the idea of the balloon and basket arrows. That would suck having spiky metal balls rain down on you. John said. Like the world's worst hailstorm. Ren agreed. And the idea of coatings are pretty cool. But why does the bow matter? It's only getting applied on the arrows, right? Roman questioned, to which the demon hostesses shrugged. The sapphire star then repeatedly dashed to avoid the Brachidios attacks. This is another weapon that unfortunately can't block, and the range is much more limited compared to the bow guns, but its light frame does allow for good mobility and makes it easy to draw and fire again after a quick dodge. And there is one more type of arrow guaranteed to do some serious damage even without coating. By adding blast powder to an arrow designed to drill through the thickest monster's shell, hunters now have access to the mighty dragon piercer, which tears its way through a monster with devastating efficiency. The host declared as he continued to fire on the monster. Whoa! That was an amazing shot. Bow users must work hard to have a quick draw that. Well, quick after sidestepping like that. Summer said, impressed. Yeah, that's not easy. You could learn a thing or two, Jimmy. Crow said with a smirk, to which the general rolled his eyes. Ooh, but this last arrow sounds awesome. Ruby said excitedly. Sai then scraped a particularly large arrow across the ground, causing the arrowhead to spark as he set it into the bow, drawing it back with extra force. Ryuji wagateki wa kurao. He cried out as he launched the arrow, which completely tore through the Brachidios, causing the monster to collapse. Holy crap! That's like a mini Dragonator. Neo said. Yeah. It puts on a nice show, too. Roman agreed. And if it pierces through tough monster shells like Brachidios, imagine what it would do to a Grim? Adam added. Not to mention, once the dragon piercer pierces the armor, it would then make it easier for subsequent attacks to get through the armor. Penny continued. For the final time, Sai was posing with the weapon. And that is the bow. A simple weapon, yet its effectiveness cannot be denied, especially when used to its fullest capacity with coatings, the balloon and basket of spike balls, and the dragon piercer. There's a reason many archers wind up in legends. He declared, before disappearing by leaping into the sky once more. The host was now fighting a Nergigant with dual blades. So now, with all of the weapons explained, it's time to quickly mention a hunter's proper target when hunting in a party. This isn't necessarily a rule or official etiquette, it's just a good idea for maximum efficiency and to limit accidental attacks on teammates. Hammer users, with the previously mentioned stun proficiency, should target the head to knock down the monster. Longsword users are best deployed at the tail to quickly sever it without risk of knocking down their teammates. Insect glaive users, with their aerial capabilities, should attempt to strike the back of the monster. All other melee users should focus the body and legs of the target, weakening them and making it difficult for the monsters to get back up. And finally, ranged weapon users should focus on the wings. Other weapons have a harder time hitting. But again, these are just suggestions. Just try not to hit where your partners are and you're good, he said as he continued to fight the Eater of Elders. Well, it may not be etiquette or a rule, but it definitely makes sense. You wouldn't put the heavy blunt weapon that knocks out monsters with headshots at the tail, and if longsword users trip up other hunters that badly, it's probably not the best to have them at the body with everyone else. John accepted the placement suggestions. Indeed. And ranged weapon users shooting the places melee weapons can't reach is the only logical idea. Ironwood agreed. Yes, organization and planning where and when to strike is key to victory. Winter confirmed. Yeah, because that's real easy with a giant monster running or flying all over the place. I think he had it right that second time. Go nuts, just as long as you don't attack where your friends are. Crow said with a shrug. Sai now went into full model mode, simply posing with the various weapons. So, there you have it, the various weapons hunters have at their disposal. There really is something for everyone and proof that anyone can stand up and fight even the fiercest monsters if they have decent armor and the weapon that suits them perfectly. If you learn your weapon inside and out, there is almost no foe that cannot be defeated, he declared, before heading out on an expedition and disappearing into the wilderness. Ah, that's a nice note to end on. Summer said with a smile. Yeah. Anyone should be able to be a hunter if they really want, they shouldn't be limited because there isn't a weapon that fits them. Ruby agreed. I find it more important that he gives everyone an option and doesn't say it's better for certain people to stay on the sidelines or that they can't help. And the ending line, to say that any foe can be defeated, is a lesson people need to hear sometimes. That there's always a way to succeed. Ashbin said sagely. Well, you know what I'm gonna ask. Katana said, looking at them. I loved it. Every weapon was so amazing. I'd love to try all the different weapons and all the different strategies our teams could use with different weapons. Ruby said excitedly. I enjoyed the dual blades and the bow. It's nice to see familiar weapons among all the crazy ones. Cinder said. I found the insect glaive, the switch axe, and the charge blade fascinating. The aerial capabilities and the kinsect of the glaive and the transformative abilities and different ways to use the files of the other two. The possibilities are endless. Penny stated. I'm just wondering what the weapons of each monsters look like. Like, I'd rather not see any more heads on sticks, but you gotta admit, that Deviljo Gunsai had looked pretty epic. I'd like to see what else you could make out of Picklesaurus. Crow said. Ruby gasped at this. I know, right? I bet Rat Halos and Tigrex weapons are super cool. She said. I wouldn't mind seeing some Legiana weapons. Pretty monster probably means pretty weapons. Coco added. I want to see some weapons made of lightning monsters. Maybe I could get some juice out of those. Nora declared. But you know, any weapon made from Elder Dragon stuff has got to be epic. I bet Valhazak weapons look metal AF. Yang suggested. I'm sure all weapons made out of any monster look incredible. Summer said. So, what monster is next? Pyrrha asked. Katana checked the list, then shuddered. Well, I hope you guys are feeling brave, because this next monster is nightmare fuel even by my standards. Steel your nerves as best you can and get ready for Baragaru. Katana said, starting the next video.